Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. Firstly, thanks for visiting my channel. I really appreciate you coming to check this out. And if you do find the content here to be useful and enjoyable, would you make sure to hit the like button before you leave? And if you watch a couple of videos, I think you'll find that the content on this channel is pretty useful, especially if you're a beginning silversmith. So I'd love to have you subscribe. I'm putting out 2 to 3 videos per week. I think most of it's pretty usable, valuable information for a beginner in particular, as well as some more advanced projects for people who are further along. With that being said, today I'm going to make a pendant, and the pendant's going to have a lower big cabochon and a faceted kind of modified emerald cut Prasiolite on top, and then I'm going to put a squared tube bail that I create out of sheet at the top for the bail, and I think I might throw in a long hinge, like a 5 tube hinge to connect the two together. So let's get started. So here's the cabochon I'm going to use. It's a garishly dyed green turquoise. For some strange reason, I kind of really like this color, even though it's dyed. It's an intense, pretty color. So and I thought it would go really well with this Prasiolite, which is also known as Green Amethyst, because they take amethyst and heat treat it, and it turns green. This kind of glassy pale green, which I kind of like. So we'll put those two together. We'll start with the bezels, and then I'll make a kind of a square tube bail, and then we'll put a hinge on it. So let's see how that goes. We'll start with the cabochon, I think. Oh, the materials you'll need: 26 gauge sheet for the back of the bezel, 3/16 inch fine silver bezel strip is what I use for most things. I got this tube for the hinge, and the one I get is usually the one that 14 gauge wire fits right into, so you get a nice big hinge. This one, for some reason, Rio sent me fine silver. I may have made the order wrong, or they screwed up, one or the other. Probably me. But this is 2.34 millimeter fine silver tubing. I prefer sterling silver, but fine will work okay. So it's got a 0.3 millimeter wall, which means it's a little bit thicker. So I like that one. Some round 14 gauge wire to be the pin for the hinge. Probably use a little square 14 gauge silver for some bordering stuff. And then this is some old silver, sterling silver strip. It looks like it's probably about, I don't know, 22 or 24 gauge. I'll use that for the sides of the tube bail I'm going to make, and I'm going to use the top of this, or I'm going to use the 26 gauge sterling silver sheet for the top and the bottom of it. So we'll get to that when we get to it. So let's start with this guy. Make sure I'm staying in frame here. So bad at that. Let's get this tight around here. In the little spot, that's a little too small. Get it off right there, I guess. Flatten this guy out a little. anybody's wondering what I'm doing with my tweezers there is, sometimes when you're using thin sheet like this and you're soldering a bezel to it, the thinness of it, when you spray flux on it and then heat it, it'll warp a little bit, and then your bezel won't be in contact with the sheet all the way around, and the solder won't wick all the way around. So sometimes if you can, while the solder is liquefied, you can gently push it down so it's in contact, and then it'll start wicking along that seam. You got to be super careful though, because under the heat the bezel becomes super brittle and easy to crack or to tear. So just super gentle pressure, and you got to wait until you have the solder really liquefied all the way around. So if you're going to do that, and I only do it when I can't get it to do it without any intervention. So just a little tip. Looks like we got a seam all the way around. No problems so far. I'm just going to trim this off right to the bezel. A little piece of square wire at the top of this to give me a nice clean straight line to attach the tube to for the hinge. That meets up okay. I think what I'll probably do is flux them both, set them on top of a couple of pieces of solder, and then see if I get most of it, and if not, I'll pick solder any remaining gaps from the top. I think we got it that time. That looks pretty good. A little excess solder on the back we can just file off. Well, that's super pleased. There's a little gap over there, so I'm going to throw a little more solder in there. See if I can't get that to look a little cleaner. I'll make the bezel for the Prasiolite here. I forgot, we're going to need some 18 gauge wire to create a step in this bezel here for the faceted stone. I'm not sure what you call the shape of this stone, but it's kind of a rounded emerald cut, sort of. Cushiony shaped, maybe? Rectangular cushion. Cut myself a little piece of 18 to make some rings to fit inside of that to create our step. Not sure if I'm going to need 2 or 3. I probably will need 3 to raise this up enough to where the pavilion of the stone doesn't stick out the back, really. It's pretty close. Cut it off and fine tune it. I always cut these a little bit bigger. That way I can gradually snip pieces out until it fits perfectly. It's much harder to add pieces back in, so if I get too short, then I usually just cut a new piece. I want to have a gap in my that's good. A little bit less. My dog sleeping over there is having a bad dream. It's pretty close, actually. Let's do another one. Pushing those both flat on top of each other in there. I wanted to see how the stone would sit on it now. I'm going to put one more in. It may be too high, but if it's too high, I'll use a ball burr to grind it down just a little bit at a slope so that the stone sits down deeper. But I think I want it to sit just a little bit higher. It's good enough to me. So that sits really close to how high I would want it to sit when I was going to set it anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and use the 3 rings. So we'll solder those in next. I always want to make sure they're sitting flat on top of each other and there's no waviness to them. And I'm going to use quite a bit of solder on these ones because I'm just going to file the bottom flat after I get it soldered in. So I'd rather have plenty of solder. I'm just setting these right on top of some pieces of solder. Once I get it hot enough, it should just suck it right up into the seam between those wires. I have seen people, and I think I did it a long time ago, where if you get this just a little bit too hot, the sterling silver melts at a slightly lower temperature than the fine silver, and so you can actually maintain a bezel here but have the wire melt to the inside of it, and when that happens you need to start over usually. So file this and see how good of a seam we got going on. Yep, I think that cleaned it up nice. So if you watched my other recent video about making a hinge pendant, we're going to put a tube. We're going to saw a little piece of this off here on the top of this, and then we'll also need to solder a tube up here, and then we'll cut out alternating sections so they fit together. However, You'll notice this has a slight curve to it, and in order for me to have a nice, neat, straight attachment here, I need a flat surface. So in order to do that, I can take square wire and wrap this entire thing and give it kind of a border, and then on the bottom I can file a nice flat surface there, which should take care of the problem for me. Okay, let's make this part that goes around this is long enough. Yeah, it should be. Shaped square wire, it has a tendency to try to twist on you, so I actually use the flat nose pliers when I'm making these. It's hard to get these subtle curves sometimes. The ends of these are just slightly curved. Sometimes I use a Sharpie for helping me to mark where I need to make the bends. So I want this to be super tight, so it doesn't have any gaps along the way. So I'm going to mark it pretty close to right where it goes around there. And if it's a little snug, then I'll file the inside of the square wire so I can get the bezel squeezed in there. I'd rather have it snug than loose, because loose means it's going to have some gaps, and then gaps make it look kind of crappy. Can I say crappy on YouTube? Remove some excess solder. Smooth it all out. Well, actually, before I do that, I probably ought to get rid of any wobbles I have. See that little wobble there? I want these to be pretty flat in a single plane. First I gotta shape it a little better. Now I'm gonna spend a little time. It's too tight to fit in there, which is what I wanted. Taking just a little bit out all the way around. I'm really just trying to push it down there so it's real tight, and I need to knock it down just a little further. That's pretty good. So same deal, I'm going to put this on top of some pieces of solder, and then we'll just let it flow up in there. And if I miss any spots from above, I can always pick solder it. What I'm doing is, after it started to flow, I'm heating from the top. Make sure the heat pulls it up through that seam so I don't have any gaps. Nobody wants gaps in their seams. Shameful. Now I I just have to file this flat a little bit. That looks pretty good. On top of this, we're basically going to have this. We'll have a hinge between it. And then I'm going to make like a little curved square tube. And to do that, first of all, I need to figure out how big of a tube I want to do. So, again, I don't want it to be super big compared to this. So about that size. So, I'm going to cut some of that sheet. Cut two little pieces, about the same size. You gotta be bigger than my shape slightly. Could just use some more sheet for this, but I have some sterling strip that's slightly thicker than this sheet. So I think I'm going to use that. So this, one of these is going to be the top of the bale, one's going to be the bottom. Use this. This I need to, I don't want it to be this wide, so I think I'm going to cut this down a little bit. Probably should measure this, but I'm just going to eyeball it. Just a little bit longer. That should be enough for both of them. Since I cut that edge with a pair of snips, I'm going to go ahead and file it. I think I might use a ring mandrel to kind of get a smooth curve on this. And then I'll do it on here, but then I'll make the curve shallower. Because I don't think I need quite that steep of a bend. And I'm going to make this curved tube. I don't know if you can see, I hope you can see this. I'm going to set that down kind of like that. I think that's about right. So I'm trying to make the curves of both this top one and the bottom one pretty similar. So they're pretty parallel. And that's pretty good, I think. So I'm going to cut that off just a bit. It's been a while since I did one of these, so I hope I'm going to remember how I did it. If not, we'll just kind of make it up as we go. So it doesn't really matter where I put the solder on this, but since I want a clean inside of the tube, I might as well put it on the outside where I'm going to trim this excess off. So I usually try to put the solder wherever it's going to be either hidden or trimmed off later. So. Probably don't need more than that. Just got to make sure they're touching. So I'm soldering these pieces of strip on top of the sheet here. Just need to make sure the solder is touching both of them. So this off. So you could use a saw to cut this off along there if you want, but what I'm probably going to do is use the shears to cut as much out of this inside curve as I can, and then I'll just use the Dremel with a grinding wheel to grind the rest of it off, just for speed's sake, since we're making a video. And I'm not a particular fan of sawing stuff anyway. If I can avoid it. I can fine tune that later, but for now, and just flip it over this way, do the same thing. And just put some solder on the outside edges. And trim that one off. Like I had good flow all the way up and down that. So this will be hinged to that. And we'll have this above like that. And I think I could solder it right to that. Not sure if I'm going to do that or not. That does look pretty nice that way. I think maybe I'll do that. That looks pretty clean and neat. Sometimes I'll use some little silver balls to separate it out like that. I don't know. Why don't you tell me in the comments what you think I should have done. So I'm going to put, one of the things I might suggest to you is a good idea is, the solder joint on my bezel is here, and as is the joint where I soldered the square wire around there. It's tempting to put it in a place like there where it's hard to see, but that also is a place where it's going to be harder to polish in there, so it's going to be harder to clean up any kind of messy looking areas. So I would suggest putting it somewhere where it's easier to get to. There's going to be a hinge down here, so I'll be able to bend that bottom piece down, and I'll be able to reach that with the Dremel or with the polishing machine much easier. So I'm going to put that downwards. It's not a requirement, it's just something that I've found to help sometimes. So. If it's a little off to one side or the other, I can always file it a little bit shorter. Before I put the tubes on here, like I said, I was going to file the bottom of this flat a little bit, so I have a flat surface. See how good I am at filing straight tonight. That looks pretty good to me. Okay, I'm going to grab my jeweler's saw. I'm going to cut a piece about the length of that. I usually, on these ones, to get them started, I go against the way the teeth are cutting, just to kind of abrade a slot. Normally I'd brace this against something, but I'm trying to show you what I do here. You want to go all the way through. I usually get almost all the way through and then bend it off. Okay. I don't think I need quite as big a one here, because I'm going to do a five-way hinge here. It's going to have 3 tubes on this one with slots between them, and 2 tubes with with 1 slot between them here on this one, and the 2 will fit down into the 3 there. So I'm going to go with a little bit shorter piece here now. Okie dokie. So I'm just gonna pick a little solder on the outside of this and solder it to that. And then I'm gonna do the same thing on this piece over here. I really want to avoid try to avoid getting any solder on the ends of the tube, because that's where the pin's gonna go in, and if you get some solder out there, it's probably not gonna go in there anymore. Okay, now before we hook these together and put a pin through and solder the pin in, I want to get rid of all the flux that's on here already, so I'm going to let them pickle for a little while, and then I'll cut the notches in the tubes and get them to the right size and everything. We'll fit them together, and we'll put a piece of 14 gauge round sterling wire in there and solder it in, and then we'll let it pickle the rest of the way and set the stones and polish it. So let's let those sit in the pickle for a bit to get rid of the flux. And we'll come back in a bit. So these haven't been completely pickled, but enough to where I can do the next step, I think. I'm going to put a piece of 14 gauge through these tubes to make sure they'll go through, and then I didn't get any excess solder in there. It looks like that one goes through. Yep, we're good. Okay. So I definitely don't need these ends sticking over the edge here, so I think I'm gonna make a little mark here. Probably saw those off, and then I'll make some marks where I need to remove tubes. So I think we can start with this one. I'm going to put purple wherever I'm going to get rid of stuff. So actually, let's do this. Let's make sure this is pretty centered. Maybe I can do a little better on my centering job if I use a ruler. That's about a ½ inch. So. That's about the right amount to remove. So we're going to start with that, and then I'll remove those two. But I'm going to move over to my sawing area. Okay, cutting these. All right. Filing that smooth right there, because you need a little room in there for the tubes on the other side to have some room to rotate. Okay, now comes the hard part. We'll see if I can get this lined up right or not. That looks pretty good. You see that or not? Okay, that's the spots that need to be cut out there. Okay. Look how close we are here. Pretty close. So now I'm going to go back and we're going to use the file to fine tune that a little bit. Okay, I'm going to take a little bit off the insides of both of these here. I'm just gradually removing little bits until they fit. There we go. This is the sketchy part, the very last one. This is one of the very few times I use easy solder. Every time else I use just regular hard silver solder. So I keep a little bit of easy solder around just for this particular situation. I'm going to flux just the very tip of the tube on the outer edge here, as well as the pin that's going through there. Same way on this side. And then I'm going to pick solder a little tiny bit of easy solder right there and right there, with the hope that I don't cause anything else to reflow. Okay, and then we'll let it pickle for a while longer. We'll set the stones and we can finish it. Okay. This is also one of the very few times where I paint on a little bit of flux. So I'm going to use a toothpick and just touch it there once I have the flame going. So I'm going to heat it up just a bit so that when I touch it, I get it to crust up pretty quick. Okay, let's see if I can do this without seizing it up. And we still got movement. That's good. Okay, so now I'm going to let that pickle, and I'll clean it up with the Dremel a little bit, and we'll set the stones and polish it, and then we'll be done. So I got it a little cleaned up with the Dremel, pre-polished, and cut myself about 2.5 pieces of tag board here for the stone. And that looks pretty good as far as the height goes. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Well, let's give that a little poke from behind to make sure it's going to stay in there. Okay, I feel like that's coming out. Alright, so I'm going to go polish this and I'll show you the final result. Okay, so here's the final one. Got good movement on the hinge. The little bail looks pretty good. So I may try to get it polished a little better in that gap in there if I can, but it's kind of a hard spot to reach. So. Alright, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, make sure to hit the like button before you leave. That helps me out a great deal. And I love to hear your comments, suggestions, ideas for videos, constructive criticism, and you know, any other kind of comments like that. I enjoy the interaction with people, and I wanted to say thank you to all the people who've subscribed so far, and also the nice comments I've been getting. They're really flattering. Thank you. But thanks for watching today. Happy silversmithing. Take care.